From the sunshine city of St. Petersburg to the Davis Islands of Tampa, the sponge beds of Tarpon Springs, the sandy shores of Bradenton Beach, and everywhere in between. Back in the first half of the 20th century, Old Tampa Bay was one of the hottest spots around. You've heard the stories of Doc Webb, the Cigar City, baseball spring trainings, the Ringling Brothers, and the list goes on. But do you happen to know about any of the wonderful music we had here back then? These were the times of the 20s to the early 50s when nearly all music was dominated by and made for dancing. Whether it was a song from a musical on Broadway playing then, or from some classical composer from the Renaissance era, or from the pen of a songwriter on Tin Pan Alley, a song was a song, not owned by any one singer or band that played it the best, and any group could play it their own way to a crowd that would love it. Where it was played over radio, or a ballroom full of crowded dancers doing two-steps, or for your friends on your living room phonograph, you could and were encouraged to dance to it. In these days, bands used trumpets, trombones, a handful of clarinets and saxophones, a big bass fiddle, guitar and banjo, and more. These bands, whether they were big or small, swinging out hot or playing it sweet and sentimental, were called dance bands. These dance bands came in all shapes and sizes and dominated all of Tampa Bay. Names you know and plenty more you don't. I'm your host Chase Porter, and I'd like to invite you to listen to for the next hour as we explore those days that they were for old Tampa Bay. Here is Danceband Days on Sunshine 96.7 FM. Last episode, we covered the first half of this era, being the 20s to the early 40s, seeing the rise of the hot jazz bands like Earl Gresh's Orchestra that played out at the Gangplank on Boca Bay in St. Pete 100 years ago, the radio stars like Francis Langford of WSUN and Clearwater's Maxine Gray who joined Hal Kemp's band, and lastly the swing bands that played down here like Don Redmond's and Florida's own Dean Hudson, ending things off at the tail end of 1941. So now, we'll resume our journey through the dance band days. Moving forward to the fall of 1942. The war was on, and Tampa Bay was a major hub for soldiers, who flooded the streets of St. Pete, Tampa, Clearwater, and other towns with weekend passes or any weekday too. We didn't just have air bases, naval bases, and army bases, but we also housed thousands of soldiers in our towns. Dozens of hotels that hadn't seen much traffic the year prior turned out their rooms, letting in thousands of GIs to bunk there. The stats are rough, but it's believed that between 1941 and the end of the war in 45, the Bay went from a combined 250,000 to about 430,000 people living there, nearly doubling its population. Many of its soldiers that came here during the war would later settle down and grow families after the war. Tampa Bay had many ways to train our boys for combat. Florida being such a flat state, it became a primary state for the U.S. Army Air Force to train and test out its planes. From B-17s to P-51s, 47s, 38s, and especially B-26s, the infamous flying boxcars would see flight here often and seal their fates at the hands of an unexperienced airman. My late grandfather, who in his twilight years dedicated his life to preserving the memory of many of these airmen who died in these crashes, told me a lot about the common saying down here, one a day in Tampa Bay, because it was that often. Fort DeSoto, MacDill, and the newly opened Pinellas Army Airfield was just some of the bases in the area. Some stories still persist of training bombing runs and target practices on beaches during the daylight. In the bay itself, many naval bases made good use of it. Various rumors of U-boats sneaking into the shallow waters in the Gulf always kept our boys on edge at the various Coast Guard and Maritime Service centers in St. Pete, part of USF's campus today. Also keeping Civil Air Patrol on a vigilant lookout. In all cities on the bay, Civil Defense Air Raid Wardens, messengers, evacuation corpsmen, and other divisions patrolled with white doughboy helmets, armbands, and whistles, especially whenever it came to blackout drills. These drills, which snuffed out every bulb in the cities, left an unforgettable impression upon those who lived through them. All of the stars in the night sky would glow overhead when in effect. A beautiful sight, accompanied by the unsettling drone of air raid sirens. With thousands of soldiers in the cities at any one time, there was tons of ways to pass the time. There were movie theaters, of course, but there was still ballrooms, dance halls, and other places where music of the dance bands reigned supreme. St. Petersburg alone was full of them. Municipal Pier, or its other name, $1 Million Pier, that stretched out into the bay was a perfect example, accessible by car or by the city's streetcar line. This pier offered far more than just fishing. Among plenty of stores, there was also a ballroom there and the studios of the by then joined station of WFLA WSUN, where plenty of local bands and singers were playing at. If you look at the pictures from back then, you won't see a massive radio tower or antenna on the pier. That was because, you see, it was only broadcasted a short distance, up to the top of the county near the Davis Causeway of Safety Harbor. There, two towers would send the signal across the state and across the nation. Then over in Tampa, one of the premier hotels at the time was the Tampa Terrace. Many bands would come and play there all the time from all over the U.S., which would be broadcasted from its beautiful Palm Room dance hall from a remote wire over WDAE, which was by this time on Franklin Avenue in Tampa, WDAE being the official station of the Tampa Times newspaper too. Over here in St. Pete, there was WTSP, which was part of the St. Petersburg Times building on 1st Avenue South too. All of these radio stations didn't just have their own sponsors and special talent and coverage of the dance bands. They also had these different slogans that got attached to their call signs, like WTSP was Welcome to St. Pete, WSUN was Why Stay Up North, WFLA stood for West Florida, and WDAE got the slogan Wonderful Days and Evenings. Yes, there were plenty of ways to see the dance bands and hear them too. National headliner bands came down here and local bands as well, but there were also a few bands that had migrated down here to the Tampa Bay area by 1942. One of the bigger names being Rudy Bundy. Bundy was one of the band leaders of the 30s who, when swing came calling and jazz faded out, decided to create a sound that was ultra new and ultra unique to their band, stylizing their music to focus on a specific sound, theme, or technique used in music. Examples of those kind of bands included that of Sheffield's Rippling Rhythm, that featured different gimmicks like water in a bowl blown through a straw and accordion passages. Another was Will Osborne's Slide Music, a band based upon the glissando of trombones and slide trumpets sliding up and down in a beautiful harmony, or further still, the sound of Hal Kemp's orchestra, as we explored last episode, that focused on the staccato of trumpets playing and often sounded like a typewriter. Bands with styles like these were very popular and a true testament to the talent of its leader. Rudy Bundy, being a clarinetist, had honed in on the technique of flutter tonguing, being able to slap his tongue against the reed of his clarinet in quick succession, giving a bit of a growl or a sizzle to the tone. Thus, Rudy Bundy's Sizzling rhythm was born. Hear it now along with Rudy's star singer, Al Calat.
Every band in the land's got their so-called red-hot man, but the man that wears that crown turned the Harlem upside down. Them old Broadway to the ground, he make your head go round and round. He's here to swing, the style is new, the burned up Lenox Avenue. So come up close here if you can to meet this brand new sizzling man. But first of all, it's up to me to see if the boys are all in key. So sound your A's, boys, best you can. 'Cause here he goes, that sizzling man.
You're hearing the sizzling rhythm of Rudy Bundy's orchestra, years back in 1937, showing off that popular style in a song that he wrote with the singer you just heard, Al Calat, in a song called Mr. Sizzling Man. Throughout the 30s, Rudy Bundy was very popular in the Midwest and Upper East Coast, but by the early 40s, he had migrated down to Florida and had mellowed out on the sizzle. Al Calat had left to form his own band, and so Rudy found another vocal talent in singer Don Dorsey and the trio of the Reed Sisters, as they played up in Jacksonville or down in Sarasota at the newly opened Lido Beach Casino, the Tampa Terrace Hotel, or St. Pete's Coliseum. By the fall of 1942, he would be heard of the new fledgling station WSPB in Sarasota. That one's slogan was, "We're Sarasota, Palmetto, and Bradenton. Let's tune in now and hear a song from the Bundy Orchestra playing at the Casa Madrid there in Sarasota, where this audio likely originates from. Here is Who Wouldn't Love You, Who Wouldn't Care.
To dream about. You're the breath, the spring that lovers get about or mad about. Who wouldn't love you? Who wouldn't buy the west side of heaven? You wink your eye. You're the answer to my every prayer, darling. Who wouldn't love you? Who wouldn't care?
Who Wouldn't Love You, Who Wouldn't Care, played by Rudy Bundy and his orchestra with Don D'Arcy singing along with the Reed sisters, here over Danceband Days of Old Tampa Bay on Sunshine 96.7 FM. Rudy by this time in 1942 was playing to crowds nightly at the Casa Madrid, a popular nightclub in Sarasota back in those days. Around this time, the band's pianist, Richard Bixby, quit the band and decided to enlist in the Army. This year also, Rudy's cousin Chet, who'd been playing the trumpet in his band, quit and joined up too, and ended up forming his own army band called Chet Bundy and his Sophisticates in Rhythm. That one played up in St. Petersburg's Williams Park often. Rudy would go on to associate with the Ringling Bros Circus and Hotel in Sarasota for years to come. Tampa Bay at this time was host to plenty of different soldiers who made their own bands here. One good example was that of Buddy Clark's orchestra. No, not the crooner of the late 40s whose name was spelled C-L-A-R-K, but the former band leader from New York spelled C-L-A-R-K-E. Then there were plenty of other examples like that of Private Jimmy Baker's dance band and Sergeant Frank Bederka's combo and Warrant Officer Mark Rubenstein's orchestra. It's a shame though that almost none of these bands have surviving recordings for us to hear today. And unlike many things in life, we actually have one thing to point to, aside from just the war itself, to blame for this. This being an event in the music industry known as the Petrillo Ban. To be a working musician back in these days meant that you were part of the American Federation of Musicians Union, or AFM for short. You paid your dues, and in return they found work for you in your local area and fought on your behalf if you were being treated unfairly by venues not paying or something else. It was a vital aspect of your life as a musician. Through the unions, the bands played for nearly every place in the U.S., and you were paid royalties for the work you did. There was an increasing problem with the record labels like RCA Victor, Columbia, Decca and all not paying the greatest of royalties to musicians, but it wasn't a big deal considering everyone still wanted to make records. But to the head of the AFM, James Cesar Petrillo, a man who'd never recorded once nor understood the necessity of recording for a band, it was a problem that could only be fixed with the nuclear option. That summer, he declared that no musician was allowed to make records after July 31st, 1942. If they did, they'd get thrown out of the union, as they were now on strike against the record labels. It didn't matter that every single musician in the union violently disagreed with Petrillo's order. It happened. The only way that the AFM would cease the strike was if the labels all signed a massive royalty hike agreement, unconditionally. So what ended up happening? The labels used the times they had up to that date to stockpile recordings by artists in order to survive the strike. Everyone thought it would probably last a few months, but it lasted 2 full years. From the top stars like Benny Goodman or Duke Ellington, down to the territory bands like Rudy Bundy's or Bundy Clark's, it just wasn't able to put out new records during this time. Everyone suffered for it. From the band leaders, the fans, and to this day, many of us lovers and historians of this music too. It got so bad at points that Petrillo ended up fighting with FDR, who ordered him to end the band because of all the damage it did. Petrillo said no. It was a whole lot of drama with it. There were a few exceptions here and there, of course, of small labels that either rebelled against the union, the bigger labels finding creative solutions, or just other ways the music was recorded between 1942 and late 1944 when they finally signed. The biggest ways in which we can hear the dance bands of the time today is through surviving radio broadcasts. In the last decade, technology had progressed to the point in which we could actually record what were known as transcription discs, made by radio stations for radio stations. These would be mostly huge vinyl records that would be recorded at the slower speed of 33 RPM rather than the commercial 78 RPM that allowed them to save 15 to 30 minutes worth of a radio program onto one of these discs, as opposed to only a few minutes on a 78 RPM. There was less fidelity at these lower speeds, and since a lot of these records were 16 inches big, the size of your car's steering wheel, you couldn't fit them onto your average record player, even if that player was designed to play at those slower speeds. So, only radio stations could play them. One of the main uses for these transcribed radio programs came as a result of the war, being the big band remotes sponsored by Coca-Cola in their program Victory Parade of Spotlight Bands. That up-tempo swinging melody you're hearing is that of the Coca-Cola Waltz, a song any listener had been accustomed to for over a decade by then. Appropriately not played as a waltz, but as a hard-swinging foxtrot, due to the nature of these broadcasts. For those who don't know about this show, let's let one of its announcers explain its purpose.
Tonight and every night, Monday through Saturday, the Coca-Cola Company sends America's favorite bands to America's fighters and workers all over the country. Wherever they are, in Maine, Florida, California, Oregon, we bring them the music they love best, played by the bands they really like most. For the men and women on the Victory March, the Victory Parade.
Broadcasted over NBC all over the U.S. Naturally, with Tampa Bay being as big as it was and with so many soldiers coming and going, a few of them happened right here. One was at $1 Million Pier in December of '42, where Frankie Masters played in their auditorium and their program was put on the air using the relay from WSUN that syndicated with NBC, and another was a full year later in December of '43, and it was at Drew Field Bandshell in Tampa, where Martin His Orchestra played right after Christmas. In the spring of 1944, Ray Hutton and her orchestra came down here and played for St. Petersburg too. Ray Hutton is one of those names that's nearly forgotten about today, but by the 40s, she was rising to become one of the top named dance bands in the US. 10 years back in 1934, she formed what was then known as an all-girl orchestra. Being as the name implies, a dance band made fully out of women on every instrument. Ina herself was singing, and she was recording some records for both Victor and Vocalion Records. This 15-piece band of hers was pretty successful, and she found herself with national radio and stage attention, as well as finding her way into movies and various sorts. But by 1939, she disbanded this band of hers and formed a band of all men, focusing more on modern swing. This group featured such notable sidemen as pianist Hal Schaefer, singer Stuart Foster, and saxophonist Louis Parasotto. Her sister June Hutton was breaking out into the scene by the 40s too, being a singer in Charlie Spivak's orchestra, and by 44 joined the Pied Pipers. A whole lot of talent that these Huttons had, and with the war now on, she was unable to be drafted. By this point, she was about the only female bandleader of note in the US, with Ella Fitzgerald dropping her band in 1942 for a solo career, and Dolly Dawn's band had fallen apart that same year due to the draft calling most of her sidemen, leaving only Ina's band standing. She was exceedingly attractive, superbly talented as a musician and singer, and widely successful as a bandleader. It was no wonder why her boys wanted to see her and have her band perform across the US. The band would play for the Maritime Service Training Station downtown, right on the bay as what is now part of the St. Pete campus of USF, being on March 13th of that year, as just one of the stops that the Hutton Band was making on their way down to Miami to play for the Frolic Danceland Club. After that, they would head back up to St. Pete in April for another show, and from there to Pensacola, and then another Spotlight Band show in Georgia. But as for this date on March 13, 1944, this would be in the auditorium on that base, and it was a show that was hyped up so much that nearly 4,000 were in attendance. For context, the Coliseum in these days pushed its maximum capacity around 3,000, so that's 4,000 in one auditorium on a military base. It was so big the crowd had to be divided up into two audiences. Half the crowd got to hear them before the broadcast, while the trainees and staff got to hear them before the broadcast. These things were always sponsored and produced by local Coca-Cola plants in the area, and ours was the building right next to Sunken Gardens on 4th Street. The broadcast itself was done by remote wire by WSUN. It would be picked up by NBC and heard across the country. And of course, since this was Spotlight Bands, it was recorded to be rebroadcasted later many times, so we can actually hear this one all this time later. So let's tune in now. It's 9:30 p.m. at the Maritime Service Training Station in St. Petersburg on March 13, 1944. World War II had another year and a half to rage, FDR is president, and a bottle of Coca-Cola only cost a nickel. From the town's own station, WSUN, broadcasted coast to coast for NBC, you're about to hear the band of Ray Hutton, here on Danceband Days, Sunshine 96.7 FM.
And here's tonight's Spotlight Roll Call. Ray Hutton. The Ray Hutton Spotlight Band. The officers and men of the United States Maritime Service Training Station, St. Petersburg, Florida. And tonight's first Spotlight tune, Rose Room, right about here. prettiest maestros the spotlight has ever seen, Ina Ray Hutton.
Thank you, Wayne, and thank you, everybody. That's a wonderful welcome, and we really appreciate it a lot.
That's right, Ina. And now that we've heard from you in words, we'd also like to hear from you in music. So let's hear that brand new ballad called Tess's Torch Song.
She was a good friend. Life was sweet. Didn't I have my man? World complete. Then the fireworks began. Ain't got no man. Got no friend. I'll bet you can guess just exactly what happened. That was the end of my friend, the end of my man, and almost the end of me.
You've been listening to Ina Ray Hutton and her orchestra live over WSUN, playing for our boys at the Maritime Service Training Station in St. Petersburg, Florida, back on the night of March 13th, 1944. Here over Sunshine 96.7 FM. You just heard the cheers of 2,000 servicemen after Ina Ray sang Tess's Torch Song, preceded by the instrumental of Rose Room. That night it was Ina Ray Hutton's 28th birthday, too. The St. Petersburg Times had photo of her and the crowds in the paper that next day. Those servicemen would be trained to sail on the Liberty ships we had, making the risky sailing from the East Coast all the way over to Europe, the Philippines, and other places in German and Japanese-infested waters. Many of these ships carrying ammo and other supplies for the war effort were subsequently torpedoed and sank, taking many lives with them, often off the coast of Florida. So the least we could do was give them a big send-off to remember. The full broadcast was 30 minutes, that also featured the singing of Stuart Foster and probably the Kim Lou sisters. But as of today, only a 15-minute edit of it has surfaced 80 years later. I'd love to have the full 15 minutes on here, but we have plenty more ground to cover. I'll make sure the rest of this broadcast is heard again on a future episode of Danceband Days. throughout 1944 alone, there'd be plenty more of the dance bands coming through the Tampa Bay area for more shows to play for our boys. Probably the most active year for St. Petersburg itself, too. Jerry Wald, Bobby Sherwood, Tommy Tucker, Will Osborne, Louis Armstrong, and Tony Pastor all do one-night stands at the Coliseum in town. Erskine Hawkins plays for the Manhattan Casino in South St. Pete, and as for the Maritime Service Training Station, Buddy Clark plays there a lot, and two of his sidemen end up joining Les Brown and Harry James's bands. 1945 brought more bands, but it also brought the end of the war, first declared in mid-August and finalized by early September. There was still some fighting going on that had to settle down over the next few months, but the war itself was over. Now came perhaps one of the greatest feats of the war, making through on that age-old military promise of being home by Christmas. Over 1 million made it home in time, but our efforts weren't complete until September of '46. Something had been happening while our boys were away, but we just didn't want to admit it. Swing was dying out, the wartime being what it was, having a mood on things, and the Petrillo Ban definitely hindered our efforts to record new stuff to keep the demand for it going, even by 1945. The record you're hearing right now, Skyliner by Charlie Barnet and his orchestra, recorded right after the band ended. Despite it being swinging, you can hear a bit more of a modern flair in it. There were many factors that caused it, but the biggest factor by far was a lot of bands were playing music that was harder to dance to, and neither should just watch the band play it. Bands like Stan Kenton's, Louis Jordan's, Woody Herman's, and other top-flight names started to lean into this. Bebop took over, as it was eventually called. The singers of the bands that made them famous, like Tommy Dorsey and Harry James was Frank Sinatra, and Ted Williams was Perry Como, were still able to sing over record, despite their bands being blocked by the Petrillo Ban, and after that, the singers got more attention. But at the same time, with all of our boys returning home and wanting to hear the music they left back in 1942, 43, and so on, well, they made swing hold out. By December of 1946, though, it all seemed to be too much. The nation's top leaders, including Les Brown, Tommy Dorsey, Benny Goodman, Ray Hutton, and Harry James, all broke up their bands. Now, many of them would form new ones or stick around in the scene for a while longer, but the writing was on the walls. As music started to mellow out more as the 40s went onwards. It wasn't just bebop that was becoming popular, but the sweet bands like Kay Kaiser's and Sammy Kays continued to fill in the gaps, as well as just singers and more novel bands filled the scene. Love for Latin genres and dances increases, so did rhythm and blues, the precursor behind what we'd later call rock and roll a decade later. The slower, more mellow stuff with large arrangements for ballads gained traction for the remaining dance bands like Freddie Martin, Guy Lombardo, Charlie Spivak, Vaughn Monroe, and so on. It reflected the nation at large. Calming down, not just from the war being over and everything returning to normal, but that normal being less crazy and traumatic at the 1930s. One of the bands that seemed to expertly blend both the more laid-back modern sound, but also be a great example of the Latin scene, was that of Tampa's very own son, Jose Morand and his orchestra. They was one of the nation's biggest Latin band leaders outside of Xavier Cugat and a few others. Heard regularly during the war, and by the later 40s had relocated to California along with dozens of other bands and musicians. A violinist and arranger he was, playing in the normal dance bands such as Al Goodman's in the early 30s. He left and started studying Latin genres of music while in Portugal, and then he became Xavier Cugat's arranger. By the early 40s he was recording for Decca, and when he relocated to the West Coast, he played for a host of different big and small labels including Musicraft, RCA Victor, Signature, and Gotham. He didn't really play down here in the Bay, but he always made it known wherever he was that he was born right here in Tampa. He had fans across the Tampa Bay area, and they'd often tune into him over the radio and buy his records. So let's listen to one of them. Here is The Story of Sorrento by him over the Signature label from California, released in May of 1947, right now on Sunshine 96.7 FM.
Story of Sorrento? Do they mention us at all? Do they tell about the evenings that I wistfully recall? In the story of Sorrento, do they say that I was there, that I've never known the magic of a sweeter love affair? With your arms around me, your eager lips like wine, you said that I was yours and you were mine. They overlooked a thrilling moment, just as people often do. In the story of Sorrento, they forgot, and so did you. Overlooked a thrilling moment, just as people often do. In the story of Sorrento, they forgot, and so did you.
Jose Morand and his orchestra just played The Story of Sorrento, along with singer Bobby Doyle for Signature Records from 1947, on Danceband Days of Old Tampa Bay, Sunshine 96.7 FM. The Latin-styled band leader Jose Morand hailed from right here in Tampa, and likely to some degree or another, knew folks from the Latin scene in Ybor City, as there were plenty of bands going all across the area at the time, and it was just a stone's throw away from his hometown in Tampa. It was there that dozens of local fans of Morand surely bought dozens of copies of this record that also featured the up-and-coming singer Bobby Doyle on it, who had been the discovery of Connie Francis earlier in the decade, signed to the same label. Now it's time for the Featured Band from Afar section. This is the part of the show in which we focus on one of the nationally known dance bands that came down here to play in the Bay, just passing through for one show or another, as the Bay really just was one town or another for these bands on the road. A good stopping point on the way to Miami or Tallahassee, a warm break from the winter snows, or a tropical vacation from the stuffy New England air. The featured band from Afar this time is Claude Thornhill. Unlike Don Redman in the last episode, it's far more likely that most listeners will have heard of or perhaps remember Claude Thornhill themselves, as he was one of the leaders that continued on past when the dance band era ended, and his music by and large was ahead of its time both in sound and feeling. This pianist and arranger got his start in the early 30s as a studio musician like most all of the other band leaders of the time, and later ended up joining the swing bands like Benny Goodman's, Freddie Martin's, and Ray Noble's for a time. Played too for the sweeter bands like Hal Kemp's and Skinny Ennis's, as well as the more refined bands like Andre Kostelanetz' largely classically influenced band as his arranger. Eventually he formed a shortly lived standard band of his own in 1937 to 1938, which would back the singer Maxine Sullivan over Vocalion Records, launching her career off, especially with the hit record of Lac Le Monde in 1937. By late 1939 he tried again and formed another band that focused his musical talents upon the lesser-known musical niceties like touch and tone, along with the softer, more flourishing arrangements that featured beautiful passages, especially with the reeds and rhythm section. Eventually built up a national following, helped by his signing to Columbia Records. Aside from his name getting confused all the time as Clyde Thornton or even Claude Toenail, at first radio engineers weren't used to such a massive jumps from soft tone to the loud playing of the band, so they often turned up the volume in the control room for the quiet parts, only to get blasted by the band, making it sound worse over the air. By 1941, everything finally fell into place. Snowfall was his theme song you're hearing here, and it was a big hit across the nation. He played at a lot of the top spots in the East Coast. When the war came, he dropped his band and went into the Navy, and he took up a band to entertain the troops in the Pacific. After the war, he came back and formed a new band for the public again in 1946, as good as ever, picking up right where he left off, but with even more refining and even more talent, like the lovely singer Fran Warren, guitarist Barry Galbraith, the crooner Gene Williams, clarinet soloist Danny Polo, and even a French horn player named Fred Schmidt, being known by then as America's best all-around band. By February of 1948, this band of his came down to the Bay, playing a few shorts starting at the Coronation Ball, the Municipal Auditorium in Tampa, which would be broadcasted over WDAE on the 10th. Then for both the Coliseum of Tampa's Davis Islands on February 11th, then followed the next day on the 12th at St. Petersburg's Coliseum, this being part of the festivities for the year's Gasparilla. So with a big name like Claude's, 3 large spots in the biggest cities on the Bay, and one of the biggest celebrations of the year, it was bound to attract crowds from all across the area. Tickets sold at the Coliseums themselves and at local Walgreens drugstores in the area. Let's hear some of what the Thornhill Band had to play that February, starting off with one that the band recorded over Columbia that last December. Here is A Sunday Kind of Love by Claude Thornhill and his orchestra, Sunshine 96.7 FM.
On the square, can't seem to find somebody to care. I'm on a lonely road that leads me nowhere. I want a Sunday kind of love. I do my Sunday dreaming and all my Sunday scheming, every minute, every hour, every day. I'm hoping to discover that certain kind of lover who will show me the way. My arms need someone to enfold, to keep me warm when Mondays are cold. A love for all my life to have and to hold. I want a Sunday kind of love. I do my Sunday dreaming and all my Sunday scheming, every minute, every hour, every day. I'm hoping to discover that certain kind of lover who will show me the way my arms need someone to enfold, to keep me warm when Mondays are cold. A love for all my life to have and to hold. I want a Sunday kind of love. I want a Sunday kind of love.
A Sunday Kind of Love, a smash hit song sung by Miss Brandwynne, featured singer of Clyde's Orchestra, when they played the Gasparilla in Tampa Bay on February 10th to February 12th, 1948. Here on Danceband Days, Sunshine 96.7 FM. At the time, the Thornhill Band was engaged at two different coliseums in the Bay, one being the Davis Islands one in Tampa, where they played on Wednesday the 11th, then they followed it up on Thursday the 12th, where they played to crowds at St. Pete's Coliseum. There they were also broadcasted over WTSP at the time for a 30-minute spot that evening. One song they likely featured that night was Oh You Beautiful Doll, sang by the band's boy singer at the time, Gene Williams. Beautiful Doll was a nearly 40-year-old song at the time, brought back into popular favor due to a growing nostalgia for ragtime of the 1910s. Now here is Oh You Beautiful Doll by Claude Thornhill and his orchestra over Danceband Days.
Beautiful doll, you great big beautiful doll. Let me put my arms about you. I could never live without you. Oh, you beautiful doll, you great big beautiful doll. If you ever leave me, how my heart will ache. I wanna hug you, but I fear you'd break. Oh, 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 oh. Oh, you beautiful doll.
You're listening to Warsaw Concerto, an instrumental hit by Claude Thornhill and his orchestra, played right after his singer Gene Williams sang "Oh You Beautiful Doll," as they likely performed when at the Coliseum of Tampa and St. Petersburg in February of 1948. After the 3 dates in the Bay, the band left, going up north to Gainesville, where they played for a few shows at the U of F for students, leaving the Sunshine State. And thus, this wraps up today's section of Featured Band from Afar. As the 50s rolled around, you could really start to hear the music change drastically. Pop music was on the rise, and the dance bands were fading out, or transforming rapidly. When it wasn't a rumba or tango, or a fad like ragtime or Dixieland revival, the bands were getting put in the background in a studio while some singer took the lead. But there was still one genre of the dance bands that got pretty popular in the 50s, that being rhythm and blues. Willing things off this episode was one of Tampa Bay's own R&B bands of the era, that being Rufus Beacham and the Tampa Toppers, a regional dance band led by Rufus, a black singer and pianist that recorded for a handful of labels in the Tampa area and played from Orlando down to Miami mainly. His wife Queenie would be the drummer of the band and featured over some of the records. Here's one that was a regional hit for the Tampa Toppers, "Do You Know How to Boogie?" on Jax from 1952.
Put your right foot out, put your left foot out. When your partner, round and round she goes. Where she stop, nobody knows. Hold on to a goodness knows. Do you know how to boogie? You know how to boogie. Do you know how to boogie? You know how to boogie. Do you know how to boogie? Well, I'll tell you how. Every time you look around, she's drinking wine. Every time. Do you know how to boogie? You know how to boogie. Do you know how to boogie? You know how to boogie. Do you know how to boogie? You know how to boogie. Do you know how to boogie? You know how to boogie. Do you know how to boogie? Well, I'll show you how.
Do you know how to boogie? Played and sang by Rufus Beacham and the Tampa Toppers, a group from the Tampa Bay region from 1952. Here on Danceband Days, Sunshine 96.7 FM. Rufus went on to have a successful career in music for the next 20 years, as the dance band era faded out into obscurity. No more were the dance bands the talk of the town. Some lingered on through the 60s and the 70s and the 80s before their leaders died or retired. Still playing on the road, the music they played changed drastically, becoming a nostalgic shadow of its former self. But the records, the songs, and a few big names from the time still live on in our memories to this day. Tampa Bay's legacy to the dance band era has sadly been forgotten, only until recently. It's the hope of this show that I can bring back its memory and its legacy of those days for those who can remember, and for those who don't, but still love the music history of Tampa Bay. For the past hour, you've been listening to and learning the history of the Danceband Days that they were for old Tampa Bay. I've been your host, Chase Porter, and it's been a pleasure to take you on this journey. I deeply love all of this music, and I love to share it with you all, and I hope to bring you many more episodes in the future over Sunshine 96.7 FM, WLMX LP. This effort undertaken wasn't done just by me alone, but helped by friends and colleagues, first and foremost being my audio engineer Maya Buick, who helped make the background music sound superb. She is an impressive digitizer, and you can hear her work on her own YouTube channel, Maya's Vintage Vault. Check it out. Next being D-Fan, a transcription disc collector who devoted years to Spotlight Band's program collection and preservation. On his YouTube channel D-Fan, D_fan, you can find the full surviving Ray Hutton broadcast featured here. Thank you also to the musical archives on YouTube of Will Adams, David Lobosco, Bob Moak, Invigoration, Jeremy Passarelli, and Internet Archives archivist Jake J. Whether you've tuned in late to the program or were here from the very start and have stuck around, I thank you. It means a lot. If you didn't catch a song title, or you want to know the name of one I didn't mention that played in the background, or if you just feel like hearing it all again, you can hear the full episode up on my YouTube channel, C Porter, that's C space Porter, under the name Danceband Days. It will have a full track list of every song in the background and the foreground. Again, that's C Porter. Look for Danceband Days. Lastly, thank you to the folks over at Sunshine 96.7 FM for giving me the chance to put on this show for you all. Thank you all for listening. Very truthfully yours, Sunshine City native, Chase Porter.